So thank you for joining me today. I am Derek Schenk, CTO and co-founder of Data Stealth. Just by way of a little introduction, Data Stealth is a PCI DSS participating organization. We're also a level 1 service provider. They're here somewhere today, Control Gap. Perfect. Shout out to Control Gap. They've been our auditor for 8-9 years now. Something like that. So today I'm here to talk to you about requirements 6.4.3 and 11.6.1. Love citing those numbers. I wanted to start off though a little bit by getting to know the audience here. If you're comfortable with it, can I get a quick show of hands, and keep your hand up. Anybody that assesses at a SAC D, SAC A, SAC AEP? Okay, service providers? And QSAs. Yeah, okay. How many of the individuals or organizations that are merchants have started down the journey of 6.4.3 and 11.6.1? Okay, so we've got some, so that's good. So I think the target here is great. So I want to talk to you about these requirements. About 1,000 days ago, 3 years ago, PCI 4 came out. These were included. We had 3 years to figure out how to deal with them. Time has ticked on. We had some clarifications that came out earlier this year. We're now down to about 200 days left before these new items change from a recommendation to a requirement. And what we've seen a lot of as we've gone out and talked to organizations is people are waiting. They're waiting for that switch from it being a recommendation to an actual requirement. And in some cases, I'm not getting audited until later in 2025, so I'll deal with it then. And I wanted to just share our experiences in dealing with these requirements and helping organizations, and just give a bit of insight as to why maybe you want to start a little bit sooner. So, as I mentioned, they are recommendations, not requirements, until March 2025. Something to note is the PCI Council gave 3 years to figure out how to deal with this before they came into effect. Other requirements have come in earlier this year. We should take a note of that. They're aware of the fact that they're not going to be an easy requirement to implement. There's a fair bit behind it, so we should leverage the time that we were given. So we only have about 20% of the time left that we were given, and once these become requirements, 6.4.3 specifically says a solution that is implemented that blocks unauthorized code. So as soon as that requirement comes in, your application stops working if that code has changed, if you're meeting the requirement. If you start implementing earlier, if you get something in place now, you can start to work through that process and operate in an alert mode. Tell me that it changed, figure out what the change was and how I'm going to deal with that. And you might say, okay, well, change is unauthorized. I'm not going to have unauthorized changes. But as I'll go through here, there's a lot of things that affect this that have nothing to do with malicious changes. So just a quick, and I'm sure everybody has read over these, so I won't go in detail on them. 6.4.3 is an engineering development requirement. It falls under secure software development. It's about cataloging and authorizing all of the scripts in the page, understanding what they do, providing a written justification for them, and then figuring out how you're going to integrity check it to make sure it doesn't change. Interestingly, this requirement looks like it's just engineering, but this one spills all over the place. This will affect marketing. It'll affect other business areas, sales, because all those scripts that are included that are gathering Google tags and analytics and TikTok analytics and feedback all fall into scope for this. So you've got to address how you're going to handle them. So this isn't just development. This is actually going to turn into negotiations between engineering and other areas on how you're going to deal with it. And 11 falls in the operational side of what you do on the 6 side. How are you going to notify on change? How are you going to alert? This has a big impact on monitoring how you're going to feed those in, and I'm going to touch on that a bit more in a second. So from a development perspective, from an engineering impact perspective, these are some of the things that we're seeing as we're helping organizations onboard. The first is the impact of the actual onboard can't be understated. If you start looking at an application and start going through the scripts that are in the page, it grows very quickly. If you or your organization use an SPA, or you're auditing an organization that uses an SPA, a single page application, it is, my apologies, it's not fun. The number of permutations, the paths of how you can get to the actual payment page, the scripts that have gotten included to that point. In an SPA, when you change a copyright notice, all the scripts change. The whole application gets rebuilt, all the scripts change, and your integrities change. So the onboarding upfront is big. As soon as you get through that onboarding and you get your inventory, 400 scripts, then you have to actually figure out how are you going to approve those scripts? How are you going to go through and say, we can justify that TikTok analytics is required. You know, we can justify that Facebook analytics is required, Google analytics, like all these analytics scripts, there's so many. And those are ones that often will cascade into fourth-party scripts that just keep bringing more and more in. So you figure out what you've got, then you got to justify it, then you got to figure out how you're going to get rid of the things that you don't want. In a lot of applications, you have a template. The template loads all your scripts across every page. So trying to figure out how to break that flow. We often find good coding practice, good development practice, I'm an engineer at heart, is don't duplicate code. So you have one set of scripts. If I've got functions or things that are used, I put them in one spot. That script gets used across your whole application, and now an unrelated change on some other page changes the integrity of a script that's used in your payment page. So trying to compartmentalize those will result in development change. Much as I've tried, there's no magic fix for this. And then you need the processes for how are you going to keep on top of an engineering group and development in every time a script changes, whether somebody thinks it's material or not. It's got to go through that process. You need the integrity checks and how you're going to integrity check it. So the integrity check side of this is difficult and, oh, I'm sorry, I'm off by one slide. Sorry, this is where I was supposed to be. So as you're looking at the scripts in the page, one of the difficulties in the scripts is the mechanisms that you have, like SRI and CSPs, they only work for a subset of those scripts. Scripts that are in line in the page, scripts that are brought in by another script, fourth-party scripts, they don't work the same with SRI. You might not be able to inject it. So if you look at the requirement 11, it actually talks about the change in applications. Applications used to be web server applications, and now they're dynamic applications that are built from content and tags. And the challenge here is that if I wanted to compromise an organization, I would change their product management system. I wouldn't change their web servers. I would go into a product management system and add some malicious JavaScript into a product description. And when that page got built, integrity checks on disk will pass, everything will pass. When the page loads, all of a sudden there's malicious things that are being loaded. And if I'm really smart, I'm going to tie it into something like on-click or on-mouse over events, because those don't apply SRI tags. So I can't even block the browser from doing anything about those. And now I can stream some content into the page, load up whatever I want, and then off to the races. The other one to be aware of that becomes a problem is JSON-P, and that's an ability for a web server to send script that's executed dynamically back. They look like API requests, but they're not. They execute, so those are included. And fourth-party scripts. This is where I have a script, and that script loads another script, and it may be out of my control to put a resource integrity tag in for that. So the last one that I want to touch on here is, and again, I touched previously, is change management. Integrating a change management process through where you can stay on top of these changes is difficult. So when we move to the 11 requirement, this is also an interesting challenge as you look to how you're going to deal with this, because traditional server file system management alerting will detect a change and alert once. Here, if you think about what will happen, I have an application that has tens of thousands of hits an hour. I go from no alerts to a script changes, now I have 10,000 alerts an hour. The floodgates open. So traditional SIEM systems where you're feeding log entries in, they get overwhelmed. You have to figure out how you're going to deal with that, bring it back down. Sub-resource integrity and CSP checks that you put in the browser, those are going to call a URL that's going to generate a log message, it's going to feed it in. It's just a flood. So figuring out how you're going to work through that flood of change. How do you deal with when alert comes in? Business says get the site back online. Who takes the responsibility and the liability of turning it back on and it might be malicious? And then the last is change management again, just like I talked about previously. So on one side, I'm making development changes and I have to keep track of those. And now I got to get those communicated over to the operational side because they have to be aware of it. If we're not aligned, you know, we haven't bridged that gap properly, you're going to deploy code at 2 o'clock in the morning and the site doesn't come back up and your operational team doesn't know that something was supposed to have happened. So change management is a big piece of this, and it's part of why I talk about getting started on this earlier, is work your change management process out now. Get in a mode where you're monitoring, you're looking at the changes, you're detecting, you're feeding that off into your operational team, and you're not stopping the application from working so that you're able to figure out how you're going to connect those teams together. So recommendation-wise, and by the way, I'm happy to speak if anybody has additional questions. I'm trying to keep this in my allotted time here. My recommendations, and the biggest one I think I could say is start now. Start now so you can get your hands around, your arms around what sort of problem you have, what sort of development you need to do, and then build a plan. 200 days left. It's going to go fast. When that becomes an actual requirement, if you're starting the process of figuring out how you're going to do development changes, what's your development time cycle? Even if you can get changes out in 3-4 months, you've got to be able to get through those. Quantify the human impact. Understand the people you're going to need to do this. Do you have qualified people to do the integrity checks, to review it, to understand what the change is, to make the decision that it's okay? Do you have the people in place that are going to deal with and react to the monitoring? And then, as soon as possible, even if it's not perfect, even if it isn't your final solution, start running in an alerting mode where you're pretending like it's real and reacting to the change. So those emergency updates, the unexpected last-minute changes, those sorts of things, you're seeing those and figuring out how you're going to deal with them in advance. And the last one, and I know standing here as a vendor, this isn't a product plug, this is just a general statement: buy, don't build. Trying to stay on top of the requirements, find a product where the organization you're purchasing from is staying ahead of those requirements. They're staying on top of them. We've already got a 401. You get your engineering team, you build, 402 comes out, now you go back. Is your core business, integrity checks and monitoring, or is your core business product selling or services or something else? So buy. And then here's the one I have to stick in at the end, which is DSL offers a number of solutions in the PCI audit scope reduction services area. We cover 6.4, 6.4.3 and 11.6.1. We also have services that will cover things like the discovery around requirement 12.5.2, We have some services that have taken organizations from SAC D to SAC A without big lift on their side, so there's some things that we can do. If you're interested in learning more, we've got some folks here today. We're at booth 27, and please come and see us. And lastly, I wanted to just welcome up Robert Spivak from Control Gap. Control Gap has been a partner of ours for 8-9 years at least. They have worked with us on our product development to make sure that we're providing value to customers, to keep us ahead of compliance, being not just at but above or beyond compliance. And mostly they've just been a pain to me trying to get my audit every year. And I asked Robert if he'd come up and join me today just to speak a little bit about the experiences of deploying Data Stealth for customers and working with Data Stealth to address these requirements. So, Robert?
Thank you very much, Derek. You can stay up if you like.
Yeah, I'll just stand off here.
Afternoon, everyone. Hopefully everybody's food comas are over after lunch, or everybody's ready to learn a little bit more. My name is Robert Spivak. I'm the Director of Business Development at Control Gap. QSA myself for many, many years, too many to count, like most of you out here. We've been working with Data Stealth for a number of years. We help build the product from the ground up and make sure that they're giving the right advice to their customers, that it may not be the advice they want to hear. It may not be the right things that the customer wants as an easy solution, but the idea is we're giving the right advice to ensure that they can maintain and sustain their compliance going forward, all in scope reduction. So I just want to recap a little bit from a scope perspective as a QSA when we talk about the different requirements that we're talking about here today. 6.4.3, as everyone knows, is the bane of everyone's existence as I hear through all the conversations today. But it is an important requirement. 11, sorry, just give me 1 second here. They put the notes backwards for me. Sorry, guys. There's a bit of a mix-up in my notes here. So actually, can we go back one to 11.6.1? We'll start with that first then. So as we have requirement 11.5.2, is everyone familiar with that? Show of hands. It was in 3.2.1. It was about ensuring that you had file protection, whether it was a detective mode or preventative, on critical files. And let's face it, what's a web page on a web server but a file? Right? It has critical components in it. It has critical files attached to it. So you had to protect it anyway. Where 11.6.1 takes it one step further and says you need to take a look inside the file and you have to protect certain elements above and beyond any kind of change detection. As Derek mentioned earlier, your change management, your incident response plan, potentially your vendor management for 12.8 could be affected by this requirement because depending on the scripts, where they're being sourced from, what third parties are doing that, whether it's internal or external, could affect multiple requirements. So certainly, although this requirement seems like it's specific around your web environment and only those pieces, it has a lot of connective tissue to different parts and different processes within your organization. When we're talking about requirement 6.4.3, it also can create an exponential growth within larger organizations, especially large e-commerce environments. We've seen, working with certain customers, with hundreds of permutations coming from different sources to the payment page, and up to 400, 500 scripts being inventoried by the time they go through that process. So being able to manage that, understand the source of each of those scripts. Do we really need them on every single page that's there? Do we understand where they're being sourced from? How frequently are they being updated? Those are all critical questions that you need to be able to understand. And tools like Data Stealth offer you the ability to fast track some of those activities to be able to at least understand what is operating in your e-commerce environment and any connected e-commerce environments. Because as we know, I'm sure nobody ever has this happen, marketing decided to go launch a new website, but didn't tell IT, right? That never happens. So those scripts may be ones that are used in your payment page. They may be sourced from the same vendors, but they could still have potential impacts when it comes to your overall e-commerce environment. So it's important to understand, yes, we're looking at the PCI environment, but you do need to take a look at maybe a broader cyber risk perspective, look at your entire e-commerce environment outside of PCI, ensure that there's not potentially other avenues or paths in that you didn't anticipate. And with that, we've run out of time, so I want to let you guys know, Control Gap is certainly talk to a QSA if you're not sure about scope. Talk to vendors like Data Stealth when it comes to tools that can help you reduce scope, potentially fast track some of the requirements that you need to be compliant with by April 1st. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.